you know how like people tell, others like, oh yeah, all you got to do is invest in the S&P 500 and you're good. Or all you got to do is, just go get a home loan, go get a duplex and you're good. And that's kind of common sense. And people don't really argue with that anymore. And I think,
Yeah.
well, the difference is by the time people on CNN or on Yahoo Finance are writing articles about the easiest path to wealth is just putting, 20-30% of your paycheck into Bitcoin. By the time that comes, you'll be buying into a $5 million Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it just gets harder and harder for people to accumulate that one Bitcoin. What do you think should be somebody's goal right now to accumulate as like a minimum? Where do you think people should be?
Well, the spectrum between the wealth spectrum in the world is so like it's
Massive, yeah.
yeah, it's massive. So I wouldn't even put a number on it. Like in
Mm.
my community, I challenge everyone to get to one Bitcoin, but I realize that there's some people who that's nearly impossible. But what I will say is 20 to 30% of all your income into Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
Like
just whatever you can afford.
yeah, whatever you can afford, 20 to 30%. Because when we 10x from here, then even your $50 that you were putting away a month is now $500, which is $6,000 a month. So even the people who were kind of at the bottom of the financial scale, now you're like, okay, well, all my savings 10x, right? And then there are some people, when I was buying in on this that FTX sell off, when I was buying into that, there were some people like, hey, bro, I'm following you in. I just bought 15 Bitcoin with you, and I'm like,
Wow.
there's a big gap between the finances of some of the people who follow me and some of the people, and some of the other people. So I would say like it, not even a specific number, like in general, I challenge people to get to one Bitcoin. But what I think is the most important thing is for you to make it automatic that 20-30% of your income and then climb from there. So if you did 20% last year, do 30% this year, do 35 next year. And
Yeah.
I would encourage people to look at it like that.
Have you noticed yourself increasing your allocation to Bitcoin over time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
bro, Bitcoin sends you down this rabbit hole. You start like, you get some money, you get some fake money, and you're like, why do I need any of this? What am I doing with any of this? So yeah, it started off actually like if you look at it like let's pretend like you're like a traditional stock investor. If you're looking at Apple as a slice of your portfolio, or maybe you're looking at like technology as a slice of your portfolio, right? But and you just throw Bitcoin in there, and then the more you learn, you're like, this isn't comparing Apple to Bitcoin. This is comparing,
Mm.
a protocol that Apple would be built on top of. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh no, I actually don't even want these assets that are priced in dollars or denominated in dollars that look like they go up, but they don't go up. Like because as
Yeah.
soon as you start pricing things in Bitcoin, everything's falling, and you're like, yeah, my allocation to Bitcoin is going to be everything.
Can you give my audience and whoever sees this, can you tell them why Bitcoin is outperforming everything? Like,
So we've never, as a human race, seen absolute scarcity in things, right? Or
mm,
even if we have seen absolute scarcity in something, it hasn't been in money, right?
yeah,
So what's happening is we have a system that's pumping unlimited amounts of fiat currency, right? And this is how most of the major governments are paying for things. They have a central bank. The central banks are loaning the money into existence. So it's not like the central banks are out, I don't know, mining for gold, and then they say, okay, we have so much gold, we'll give the United States government some of it. No, they're literally creating the money and loaning it away to, let's say, the US government, and the Federal Reserve is loaning money to the US government. So they're creating all this money. So if you're looking on the fiat currency side of things, we have a faucet that does not turn off. And that's money creation. It does not turn
mm,
off. So if you have a faucet of money that does not turn off, and it's going into something that has limited supply like Bitcoin, well, think about it like putting a balloon underneath the faucet, right? The balloon, you're not going to make two balloons. You're not going to make three balloons. What's going to happen is the balloon itself is just going to expand and expand and expand.
wow,
So the way that I see it is, as long as that faucet doesn't turn off, Bitcoin's going to grow at a crazy rate. Now, even if the faucet were to turn off, people would still realize that Bitcoin's a superior money to everything else because it's you can move it faster, it's more secure. So even without the unlimited inflation, we would probably still come to the conclusion that a digital money is better than a physical money. So that's the way that I look at it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great. I like the balloon analogy. So even if it stops, even if the water stops flowing into the balloon, because people are going to. So if the faucet stops flowing, if people start using cups and start filling up the
Yep,
balloon, like they start
exactly.
taking it out of other cups, yeah. Wow.
Exactly. So there's other cups of things that you
Yeah.
would say, well, okay, I had this cup under the faucet, so I've been saving money in real estate, right? I'm going to dump
Yeah.
some of that into the balloon, and the balloon just keeps expanding. But the main thing that we have, and the most obvious thing that we have, is the faucet of printing unlimited fiat currencies.
Right, and it's just gonna keep growing because they can borrow money into existence,
Yeah.
right? I think that's what people just can't wrap their heads around. I keep telling people, the money that you're saving is literally worthless. It's only worth something because we trust that it's worth something. If
Yep.
that trust fades, and that trust is fading, even the wealthiest people in the world don't want to hold U.S. dollars. Even Americans don't want to hold U.S. dollars because they're giving them away to buy Bitcoin. The biggest institution in the world, the one that's supposed to be backing this currency, is negative on it. They're short on this currency. So where this
Yeah.
they're like $37 trillion in debt because they
And
know that the
that
value is going
number
to
is
decrease.
growing. I look at it every
Yeah.
day. The US debt clock, I look at it every day. And what's even crazier is like the faucet's not going to turn off. It can't. If we turn the
No, I
faucet off,
can't.
the whole empire collapses. So,
Yeah.
I just kind of put two and two together. I say, well, if inflation is going to make this thing grow at a faster rate than normal, and we know we have to inflate the money away, we have to we kind of have to create more money in order to pay for all of our debts, right? We have to shrink the value of the dollar. It needs to find a home. All that new money needs to find a home somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's a process of elimination for where the home is going to be, right? So you're going to say, am I going to store my money in equities? Am I going to store my money in real estate? Am I going to store my money in collectibles? Am I going to store my money here? So you just run through this process of elimination, and you get to the point where you say, well, if I store my money in real estate, that becomes like an attack vector, right? So
Hmm.
if they wanted to squeeze you, so if they know that, okay, this is your house, and or there's so much wealth in real estate, we need to squeeze some of the juice out. Well, they'll just increase the property taxes, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe the local HOA that you have will say like, "Hey, give us some more money," right? Like it's a real physical, obvious thing that I understand that you have wealth because it's sitting right there. Why don't these people in these big houses pay for this, or why don't just becomes an attack vector. So you'll eventually rule out real estate as an investment, right? And then you have the human side of things, which are like your tenants. Like, man, like, okay, maybe I bought a house and I'm cash flowing X amount of money, but one repair that's due to a human error, and now I coughed up my cash flow for this month, right?
Hmm.
Or to even think that even if you are cash flowing, the rate in which you're paying down the loan that you had, it doesn't the beginning of the loan is just straight interest. You're just paying majority interest, so even if you think you found a path to beat the system, you're really just complying with the system. So I think it's a process of elimination. You move to stocks and you say, well, a stock can only grow so far because eventually what the stock is valued at has to be near a multiple of their earnings. So if the stock isn't growing forever with their earnings, then the stock price should only grow so far. And once it gets too overvalued, then it will sell off, or they'll just issue more shares. If it gets too hot. So you're like, man, I don't want to be diluted. I don't want my wealth to be taxed away. I don't want it to be confiscated. I don't want to because let's go back to real estate. If you were to talk about the property taxes, that's not something you're voting for. They just assess the
No.
value up and allow you to argue against why they shouldn't. But they're going to assess the value up. You think, oh, my house was worth $1 million, now it's worth 1.5 million. Cool, here comes some more property taxes. you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a
And
process of elimination.
And you know what the crazy thing with property taxes is? Because we don't have any vote for it, people still think, oh, they can't increase the property tax. They won't increase the property tax. But as soon as they do, like it's going to be a surprise. It's not like they're going to tell you in advance, oh, we're increasing your property taxes by this much, and it's going to skyrocket. And they're not going to tell you that. They're going to do it overnight.
Yep.
And by the time it's done, your property has lost a ton of its value because the market knows we're going to have to pay this property tax in order to own this property. So why would we want to own this property?
Exactly. So I was even thinking about this. Okay, so if the value of your property goes up, then the insurance goes up, right? So my insurance,
Yeah.
one of my houses doubled, right? In the last 3 years, it's doubled. Like the insurance itself, my premium doubled.
Wow.
So imagine you're thinking, okay, if this was a fair and honest system, I should
Hmm.
be able to earn some money and then just, sit in, let's say if I'm on fixed income and I'm making $50,000 a year and my expenses are $25,000 a year, right? Well, I get my fixed income because I'm retired. I just pay for, my property taxes. I pay for my food. I pay for these things and I'm good. I put my time in. I put 45 years into working in the system. But what ends up happening is if the property taxes are increasing, if the cost of the food is increasing, the cost of the gasoline or the oil is increasing, if the cost of insurance is increasing, healthcare is increasing, if everything's going up, eventually my cushion starts getting eaten at. And then you go, oh, well, I need to go back to work. And you're like,
Yeah.
so the incentive to just beat the game. And then, when you're 65 years old, you can kick back and relax. Well, they're stealing that from people.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's getting worse. More and more people aren't able to get to that point. Like they're never going to be able to get to that point where they can actually be free and they don't have to work for a living and instead they can live off their assets. But the thing is that in this system, the way that I see it in this system, there's one group of people who can live off their assets, and then there's another group of people who will never will have that opportunity because the people who can live off their assets in the past, they were able to borrow a certain amount of money. They were able to borrow money that was created out of thin air to buy a real asset, and then bump the price of that asset up, and it keeps going up and it keeps going up. It's like baby boomers. They were able to buy their houses for like $800, and now they're worth 800,000.
Yeah,
Right?
isn't it crazy that we don't think like, okay, if we continue on this path, if my grandpa
Hmm.
bought a house for 8 grand and I have to buy one for 400 grand, and my grandchild's gonna have to build one for 8 million, or my great grandchildren is gonna have to build, and you're like, at some point, do we realize that a higher number doesn't mean anything? So if the nominal
Hmm.
value of things just grow, like you think that's a good thing, but it's not. It's not about the number going up. It's about more purchasing power. So if you aren't
Yeah.
getting more purchasing power, then you're getting poor. Even if the numbers on your screen go up, even if your stock, even if the S&P 500 is at an all-time high, or the value of your real estate has tripled on paper, if you cannot buy more things, then you aren't getting wealthier. And I think that that's kind of a concept that people are going to wrestle with or struggle with before they completely understand the value proposition of Bitcoin. Hey, I'm here to get more purchasing power, right? Not to get a higher number. If you wanted more money in a nominal value, then just go to I don't know, Nigeria and swap your euros out, and you'll
Yeah.
have more. You're not gonna
Yeah.
have more
Yeah.
purchasing power, but you'll have more of these units.
Yeah. So would you say that Bitcoin is the only savings tool and everything else is an investment?
Yeah, I
Do you,
would.
like, do you agree with
Yeah,
that statement?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Bitcoin,
Yeah.
yeah. Bitcoin's a savings technology. It's my method of storing my wealth. Everything else
Hmm.
is an investment because I believe everything else becomes speculation, right?
How does that apply to real estate? Like, why is real estate speculation? I know the answer, but I want you to explain it in your words because you give such great examples.
Well, there's so many different ways that you are speculating on real estate. So one, to purchase a rental property, and when I say real estate, I mean rental property. I don't mean your personal house.
Yeah.
Like if you
Yeah.
want to buy a house for your family, do your thing. But I mean like as an investment. So you're also assuming that other people are going to invest there. You're assuming that you're going to find good tenants. You're going to assume that that the value of this thing is going to go up. You're going to assume that they don't continue to tax you at a higher rate, because if your tax rate goes from 6% to 10% over 4 or 5 years, or over 10 years, you're losing value there. So in order for you to store your money there in real estate, then you have to assume these things won't happen, which is a speculation. I'm going to, even to say that I trust my tenants won't destroy my house, you're speculating.
Yeah.
Right. When I know that it's more of a certainty thing that no one's going to steal my Bitcoin. Right. I secured it the right way. I believe no one's going to take it. It'd be very, very, very hard. So I think the more that you start to understand Bitcoin as an asset and Bitcoin as a network, then you start to see that, this is a lot safer than we think. Right.
Yeah.
And even this is why I preach about the concepts of risk versus volatility, because people will say it's too risky. It's too risky. Right. So let's do this. Like, let's put ourselves 200 years in the future. Right. And then people are learning about ancient America or ancient Britain. Right. And then they're like, so people are like studying ancient America, ancient Britain. They're like, they had access to Bitcoin when it was only $50,000 or it was only $100,000. Like, by that time it had a 900,000% return. Like, I'm sure everybody back then got wealthy, right? Because you just look on a chart and you just see this thing go straight up and to the right. So you're just going to assume all the people of this nation or of these nations got wealthy. But then when you put yourself in modern times, there's other people who are trying to talk you out of it. And they're trying to talk you out of it based on the research and the knowledge they have not done.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, hey, I heard this or I heard this, and they're just echoing. And the deeper you start to learn about it, you're like, yeah, this is pretty safe, bro. Like, this is pretty safe. All I have to do is stomach the volatility. That's, and make sure that I store my Bitcoin, the proper way. But that's it. Don't panic sell.
Yeah, I think back to what you were saying about speculative for real estate, like just tying in with what you were saying now. I think real estate is also speculative because you're expecting that your government's going to maintain your property rights, that they're not going to take them away.
Oh yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
Like with Bitcoin, that doesn't happen.
Think about like squatters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like squatters. Like that's an assumption that you make that, hey, the government's going to allow me to stay in my place or allow me to kick someone out of my place if they choose to not pay their rent. And then the government goes, oh yeah, actually no, bro, because everyone's entitled to live somewhere, so they got to live with you. And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? I had the issue with during COVID. I stopped charging some of my tenants rent during COVID, and I'm like, okay, this will give them enough time to get their money together, blah, blah, blah. So,
you did it by choice.
Yeah, I did it by choice. All right. I did it by choice, and I didn't charge them for like 8 months, 9 months.
Wow.
And then when I eventually did say, hey, like, okay, it's time for you guys to start paying rent, they stopped completely. And then I had to threaten them with an eviction, and then they eventually just got up and left. And I'm like, it creates a counterparty risk, right? It creates this counterparty risk. And I know, what my tenants did for work. I know that they were still employed. I know these things, so, if your audience is watching, it's not like, hey, they lost their job, or no, I know they were still gainfully employed. I just wanted them to, get a little cushion, because nobody knew how long the COVID thing was going to last. And then when they have, or when they had a good sum of money stacked up, and they're like, okay, we can start paying, or we can just stay here and use the legal system against him. Okay, well, if you are going to evict me, it's going to take 3-4 months, at minimum, to get me out of here. And by that time I can find somewhere else to live. And it just ended up becoming a headache. And you're like, man, I don't even want these, counterparty risk.
It's not even worth it. It's not even worth it. It's like if you give them something and they want so much more back, like they're just going to take advantage of you. And a lot of people are like that because that's just human nature.
Yep. And another thing too is, think about this. Let's play the opposite side of this. You have great tenants, right? Let's say you have great tenants that always make their payments, and they always, they're taking care of your property. They do everything they do. They're the perfect tenant, right? Ideally, they're the perfect tenant. Okay, well, the Federal Reserve issues more US dollars and loans it to the government. The government needs to increase taxes in order to pay some of that back, allegedly. So then they increase your property taxes. And then well, they assess the value of your house up, and then they increase your property taxes, and then the insurance company says, hey, your house is worth more now, so you got to pay a higher premium. Now you have no choice but to increase the rent on the good tenants, and you're
Yeah.
like, in order for you to survive in this real estate investment world, it's like you still need to step on someone else. So
Yeah.
even if your tenants, you're like, I'm doing a good thing by providing them like a safe place to stay, and they're paying their rent, everything's good. Well, things that are outside of my control are now going to force me to increase your cost of living. So they increase my cost of living by devaluing my currency. Now I need to increase your cost of living. So in order for me to stay afloat, I need to step on you a little bit. And it just becomes a game where you're like, I don't want to participate in this.
Yeah. The way that I see it is your tenant is a slave to you because they have to pay you no matter what. Like they're doing the work, they have to go to their job and they have to earn their money and then they have to pay you. But you're a slave to the bank because the bank has full control over you, right? If you don't pay them, they're going to
Yep.
take your house, right?
Yep.
They're going to take your
Exactly.
asset,
Now
which is crazy.
imagine in that scenario that I just gave you, where you're now telling the tenant like, hey, I got to increase your rent because you don't want to eat all the extra costs that are coming. But
Hmm.
imagine that tenant's employer is not giving them a pay raise,
Yeah.
right? So you're like, okay, well, your rent's going up by X amount and they can't get a pay raise. So as long as your cost of operation keeps increasing, and let's say even if they do get a pay raise, it's not increasing at the same rate that your cost of operation, and you're passing this cost off to your tenant, and you're like, man, like this sucks because I'm actually making their life harder.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think either way it goes,
And
you're
you're
like,
forced
man,
to do it.
yeah, I don't want to play this game. I don't want to play this
Yeah.
game at all anymore.
Yeah. It really is a game, right? I mean, you're basically you're controlling somebody else's life. Like you're trying you have to extract wealth from other people in order to survive in this game
Yep.
because no matter what, your costs are going to go up, their costs are going to go up. So there's people who are they can barely pay for their own rent, but then they have to support their landlord's rent and their landlord's lifestyle as well, which to me it's more about morals. Like I can't
Yep.
do that. I can't tell somebody that, oh, if you are already paying $3,000 a month, you need to bump this payment up to 3,500, even
Yep.
though you can't even afford 3,000. You can't even afford to put food on your table at the $3,000 level. And it's not even the landlord's fault. Like the landlord isn't the bad person here,
Yeah.
right?
They're
Like
yeah, they're
that's like
just passing off the cost.
exactly.